Tonight we're in a spectacular setting, City Hall on the south bank of the Thames, the home of London's government, with the City of London behind us and the Tower of London over my shoulder, which used to stand as a warning to errant citizens. Welcome to Question Time. To our audience at home, to our audience here, to our panel, we welcome them, the Conservative Mayor of London, Boris Johnson, from the Cabinet, the Liberal Democrat Energy Secretary, Ed Davey, Labour's former Olympics Minister, Tessa Jowell, the Daily Mail columnist, Melanie Phillips, and the comedian, Russell Brand. Thank you very much. Our first question from Weng Ang, please. Weng Ang.
Should we jail reckless bankers, and which bankers would the panel wish to be prosecuted?
Should we jail reckless bankers, a proposal that came up this week, and which bankers would the panel wish to see prosecuted? Boris Johnson.
I think you should certainly jail anybody who's guilty of criminal behaviour. And I think that you have to... The trouble at the moment, I think what people find so frustrating is that for all the grievous mistakes, the semi-criminal acts that the bankers got up to in the period leading up to the crash, absolutely nobody has been so far successfully prosecuted. Nobody has been sent to prison. There's a huge amount of anger about that.
What could you send people to prison for? What could you send a banker to prison for?
The trouble is at the moment that statute doesn't really cope with the kind of things that they were up to. So what you would need to do is frame some law that said that if they were going to imperil the assets or the savings of their customers with the risky behaviour, the addictively risky behaviour that they got up to, then they should face some sort of penalty. You could imagine you could imagine a criminal sanction or a law against such behaviour.
But how do you distinguish bad judgment as a banker from a kind of willful criminal attempt to take people's savings off?
Well, I mean, that would be a matter for the court. And that
is it easily done?
No, I don't think it would be very easily done. And I think that you've got to be very careful how you draw it up. And the general point I would make, 4 or 5 years after the whole thing exploded, is yes, by all means, let's regulate these people and let's make it absolutely clear to them that they got it wrong. But I really don't see any long-term advantage to this city or this country in continuing with an orgy of banker bashing financial services when, don't forget, I know this is an unpopular point, but it is worth making, there are hundreds of thousands of people in this city who are not on big incomes, who don't take huge bonuses, who are earning very, very modest salaries, but whose livelihoods and the livelihoods of their families depend entirely on the success of financial services in London. Don't forget that fact. Don't imperil London's position as the greatest financial capital on earth.
Yes, sir. Maybe we have a number of bankers and financiers here. You, sir, in the centre there, respectively.
If anyone has read the Stanford prison experiment, it shows that good people do bad things if the system lets them do it. So I wonder how much the system is to blame rather than the individuals.
Ed Davey.
I think the gentleman has a point, and the interesting thing about this Commission's report is it doesn't just say jail the bankers. I think if there is a new criminal offence, as I think there will be, it will be a high test, and that would be the ultimate sanction. But the Commission also talks about ensuring that there's individual responsibility, that the systems are changed. Because what I found most astonishing during the banking crisis is some of the people at the top of these banks were able to say, well, we didn't know what was going on. We didn't understand the risks our banks were taking. That's just not acceptable. And look at the mess it's got our banking system in, our economy in. So we're right to start taking these measures. Now, the government has been acting. We haven't just sat around doing nothing. We've got the biggest set of reforms to the British banking system ever. We've now got a new regulatory system with the Bank of England in charge. We've ring-fenced the casino banks from the banks that you and I invest in. We've got the toughest regime on bankers' bonuses in the world. So we've done a whole range of things. The good thing about this banking commission is it gives us another set of ideas to make sure we reform our banks. Boris is right. Banks play a critical role in our economy, but I don't think there's enough competition in the banking sector.
Who would you like to see
these reforms and take them further?
Mr. Wing said, who would you like to see prosecuted? Got anybody you'd like to see prosecuted?
What we shouldn't do...
I mean, you've got the record of what's happened.
Before the offence is even brought in, we shouldn't start retrospectively applying it.
OK. An orgy of banker bashing is what we're in for, Russell Brand. Do you think that's what's happening?
I think an orgy of any kind would be great. But one that focuses on banker bashing would be the best kind of orgy I can imagine. Hey, what you said, mate, was wicked, I thought, saying that the system itself inherently encourages that kind of behaviour. When looking for the culprits and who to prosecute after these transgressions, look for the people that after that crash, where loads of ordinary people lost loads and loads of money, look for the people that have got loads of bonuses and loads of money. They're the people that are criminal. Those are the people that need to be prosecuted. And whilst to a degree we have to placate the city because our economy is built on it, don't you think it's happened a bit too much that they can behave in this rampaging manner while ordinary people continue to suffer? I think that we need to see punitive measures immediately employed so that it doesn't continue to recur, not just because of some weird lefty agenda, but because if there are not penalties, the behaviour will happen cyclically. So people need to go down, and it's the people that have got the money that need to go down. Right.
Yes, you're in the second one. Third row, yes. No, the person with spectacles, yes, you are.
If we're going to prosecute bankers for making mistakes, surely we should also prosecute politicians for lying.
Yeah. Melanie Phillips.
Well, I have great sympathy with that point of view, and I think that's what the gentleman who referred to the system was getting at. I mean, there may well be good reason for bringing in a new criminal offence, and there may well be individual bankers who should be deemed to be guilty and should be prosecuted and should be found guilty of that or other offences. But I think that it's very easy to kind of whip up a sort of witch-hunty atmosphere against bankers. I mean, one of the reasons why the banking crisis happened was not simply the greed of individual bankers, be that as it may. It was the fact that the Bank of England took its eye off the ball. The Treasury basically said, let rip. We are going to lift up the regulatory system in order to let rip because we want to get the money coming in. And, you know, there is a responsibility for politicians to bear in all this. I'm not saying they should be prosecuted, but it's very easy to single out bankers. I mean, everyone hates bankers, don't they? We all hate bankers because they're rich. It's so easy to raise a cheer against bankers, isn't it? But actually, it may be that other people are responsible. And it may be that, as someone has said, when you think about it, when you look at what they actually did, is it always going to be so easy to decide when it was a bad judgment, which is culpable, negligent, incompetent, and where that shades into kind of deliberate and even malicious recklessness? I think we all feel that recklessness should be punished, but I think that we have to be very careful not to just damn everybody.
I don't know, like, Melanie, what I'm thinking is that incompetence of that degree that has those kind of consequences is indistinguishable from malice, in my opinion. And do you think it might be likely that if 50% of Tory party funding comes from bankers, it might be hard for them to think of ways of penalising their mates? That's where they get half their funding. If I was 50% funded by people, I would be reluctant to penalise them. That's how it works. When you're saying the politicians and the bankers, there ain't that much of a distinction, as far as I can work out.
Yeah. OK. I think I'm with you, Russell, on that last point, because I think one of the chap with spectacles who asked the question about how do you target the right culprits, that seems to me to be the key problem. Yes, you probably could frame a law that would stop bankers who took extreme risks with other people's money, but what about the Labour government? Who were in power in the period, as Melanie indicates, leading up to the crisis. There they were, sitting there deregulating. Gordon Brown went to the City of London in June 2007 and said, we are entering a golden age of banking in the City of London. And what kind of signal did that send to those people?
All right.
Now, should Gordon Brown be sent to prison?
Yes. Yes.
Tessa Jowell. She was part of that government. Should she be sent to prison?
Tessa Jowell.
I sincerely hope not. I'd go and visit
Boris,
Tessa in prison.
She might not welcome that.
She might want to go to prison.
Okay, just to first of all to answer the question. Yes, it is right that criminal sanctions are introduced. Why? Because of the scale of damage that the malpractice, the incompetence, the malevolent practice by some bankers, completely unaccountable because of the scale of damage that it did to the economy. And yes, it is right that our economy is very heavily dependent, has been very heavily dependent on the tax receipts from the financial services and from the banks. And yes, it is right that financial services and the banks were under-regulated, and were under-regulated while we were in government. And we have recognised that. But what is also important to recognise is that the Tories, and I think even you, Boris, were saying even in that under-regulated time, the banks were too regulated. So there are a lot of lessons to be learned from this. And the fact is that criminal sanctions will be one thing, but also let's hear it for women on the trading floor, women in the boardrooms, changing the culture of banking. Because it's the culture that was as much to blame as the behaviour of irresponsible and reprehensible but too well-rewarded individuals.
Why women? Do they behave differently on the floor of banks?
Absolutely. I mean, there's
less
plenty,
competitive than the men?
There's plenty of evidence
less
to
alpha
show
males bashing each other?
Absolutely right.
Do you think it would have been better if there'd been a female,
you've answered your own question.
A female Prime Minister who wouldn't have recklessly racked up the deficit in the way that Gordon Brown did?
Christine.
Maybe that would have been better. Margaret Thatcher, for instance.
Boris, you know perfectly well that the deficit was principally
she wouldn't have let it happen.
Was principally caused by the global collapse of the financial crisis.
I gave the man with spectacles there who I wanted to bring in before but didn't quite manage to, and then I'll come to you. Yes.
I'm really concerned about our expectation of bankers to be the moral barometer of what's acceptable in that environment. There were no rules. They were able to push the boundaries to the absolute apex of what was acceptable. So I think we don't need to look back on what we should be doing, but we need to look forward about what we need to do to make sure, because they do, at the end of the day, it's a very aggressive job, and they do make money for our pensions. So we need them, we just need them to be more responsible, not to knock them.
And you, the woman there in the second row.
I agree with Tessa that the Conservative Party supported the deregulation of the banks and that they shouldn't forget that. But I'm one of those people that Boris mentioned who work in one of these banks, one of these moderately paid people who works in these banks. And what I think is important is that there are plenty of people there who do work hard and who do work honestly, but that there's not enough of us, and that then it seems something needs to be done to support people who do want to work honestly within these organisations to make them better.
Are you, I don't want to intrude on your professional life, but are you in a position where you have people above you whose behaviour you're critical of or despise? Are you forced to do things you don't want to do? Don't lose your job on air,
I've actually resigned my position, so perhaps I'm in a better position to answer that question.
Then you can answer it then.
I wouldn't ever say that I'd been forced to do anything wrong, certainly not. But I would say that there are behaviours that I have seen, witnessed, almost on a daily basis that I'm certainly critical of. Compliance issues that people just laugh off. And that shouldn't be the case. That shouldn't be allowed to happen. Perhaps there needs to be some external but in-house regulation.
And is this in a big trading bank, or is it in one of the sort of a merchant bank or whatever?
An investment bank.
Investment bank, yes. And the woman there in the fourth row.
I'd just like to hear the rest of Tessa's point about how women perform in banks and boardrooms before she was rudely interrupted.
Okay, before you were rudely interrupted, Tessa.
Absolutely.
Probably by me.
That's all right. That's part of the game. But no, Christine Lagarde, head of the IMF, famously said, if it had been Lehman Sisters instead of Lehman Brothers, perhaps we wouldn't have seen the crisis start with that. And, I can see women in the audience nodding. You know that if women are present, women act differently, more consensually, more risk averse, more
sexy.
Maybe that too, Russell. But part of the problem has been the macho male, go for it, very aggressive. I'm in it. I'm here for my bonus at the end of the year. That is the culture that's got to change. And you're absolutely right. There are thousands and thousands of people, decent people, working hard in banking in this city. It is important we remain the banking capital, the financial capital of the world with a decent banking system.
Do you go for this?
I can't say I entirely share Tessa's optimism about women being the icons and paragons of integrity and competence. I'm just thinking of, and we may come to it later on in the show, the Care Quality Commission, headed by women. I mean, it's not exactly a great advertisement. I don't think it's the case that either men or women are more susceptible to corruption or fraud or incompetence or malice or recklessness. I think we're all frail. We all need to have systems of regulation put in place, and we all need to be in a society which has a shared culture of integrity and trust and honesty, and that's what we've all lost.
Okay. Let's, we'll go on to another call. We've got a lot of questions, including possibly one on the NHS, which you mentioned. Just to say, you can, of course, join in tonight's debate by text or on Twitter. Our hashtag BBCQT. You can follow us at BBC Question Time. Text comments to 83981. Press the red button to see what others are saying. Russell Brand, I think you have 6.5 million followers. I don't think Question Time has quite that. But anyway, it's building up.
We can unify our followers if we're allowed to establish a single agenda. Particularly on this banking issue, in there in the glasses, your point was best. I reckon a different kind of regulation, say the banks was, I heard this off of, well, I've worked out from what you said, nationalise them banks, because then, you know how we have to bail them out when they lose all the money.
They are nationalised.
Keep them, though, properly. Don't flog Lloyd's back, as George Osborne was saying yesterday, at a cheap price to his mates. So I think let's keep them banks for us so that we will reap the benefits as well as paying the deficits. So your idea was good.
We'll go on to another question. Peter Lineen, please.
Are UK drug laws working?
Are UK drug laws working? Well, last month the Home Office has been off to 10 different nations to study drug policy, and there have been various proposals made for liberalising the laws. Melanie Phillips, do you think the drug laws are working in this country? Should they be altered?
According to the statistics that I read, fewer people now are taking drugs. Drug use is going down. So from that point of view, drug laws are working. I think that they are working, insofar as they are working, it's against a background of a movement to stop them working at all. This idea that, it's not the drugs that are the problem, it's the laws that are the problem, that we've had a failed war on drugs. And I don't see it that way myself. I see in the last few years, or several years in fact, a policy which has been to have a move away from law enforcement into what's called harm reduction. And what harm reduction means is that you don't try as a society to stop people using drugs on the basis that all illegal drug use is harmful to the person and to society. You don't try and stop that. Harm reduction means you accept that it's going to happen and you try and mitigate the harm. And in my view, that kind of gives a green light to people to take drugs, and more people get hooked onto taking drugs. When I say law enforcement, what I'm thinking of is what they have in, say, Sweden, where they have their own problems. But nevertheless, what they do is they have a kind of zero tolerance of drugs, which means not that every drug user gets locked up, but every drug user is regarded as a problem, not as a victim, as a problem, who needs some kind of attention. He or she may be sent to prison, but not that often, especially if they're not dealing. But what they are made to do is have some sort of attention which helps them kick the habit, which helps them into treatment, which doesn't help them into treatment, it makes them have whatever is considered appropriate.
So you're not in favour of criminalising in the sense that anyone found with drugs should be sent to jail or banged up. You think that there are other ways of dealing with it?
Those are two different questions.
All right.
You can criminalise something by making the possession or use of something illegal, but it doesn't mean that you have to lock them up. That, in my view, may be appropriate in some circumstances, but not in others.
Okay. Russell Brand.
Well, mate, I don't think drug laws are working because people take drugs all the time. People take drugs because of social, psychological and emotional reasons. You're a lot of young, aren't you, in that little bit? You're the young paddock. You're the people most likely... Well, who knows? You might not be the most vulnerable to addiction. For me, it's not about the drug laws. It's about treating people with addiction issues in a compassionate and empathetic way. The opposite, actually, of what Melanie was saying, who, on a personal level, is really lovely. I've already worked out because I was chatting to her. But on that issue, I disagree with her wholeheartedly, you see, because I'm a recovering drug addict myself. When I was using drugs, I don't care if drugs are illegal. If I need drugs because I'm in pain inside, I'm taking drugs. And I know this to be true across drug addicts all over our country. If you criminalise them and marginalise them, you place an industry in the hands of criminals and you make it difficult and shaming for them to get treatment. That's the wrong way to handle the situation. We have to reach out to people compassionately, then we have a chance of achieving a solution.
And
so the laws are wrong in a way.
Would you like decriminalisation of all drugs?
Mate, Mr. Sir David, I don't like
Just David will do.
David, I don't like to get drawn on that because I'm dealing with this in a very direct way. People that are suffering from drug problems don't care about the law. They care about getting the correct treatment, which I believe is abstinence-based treatment.
Okay. The man in the second row. Yes.
Is it not sometimes necessary to criminalise these people to show who take the drugs, to show other people such as like the young people at college that I'm with at the moment, that that's not the road to go, and that in fact there's another path of education and working towards a better future?
But Boris Johnson, do you agree with that?
Yeah, I think your drugs policy should be dictated by what you're trying to achieve. And we're trying to reduce drug use overall, and we're trying to fight crime. We're trying to reduce crime. That's the two most important things. And listening to what Melanie had to say, I'm a huge admirer of Melanie, as you know, generally. But I think there was a contradiction, because you began by saying rightly that drug use now in this country is at an all-time low. And I think that is partly because we are pursuing sensible rehabilitation policies, looking at the problems of the users, really trying to deal with their struggle with addiction, and so on and so forth. That is the right way to do it. You've simultaneously got to have quite a tough law and order response. And that is working too. And crime is well down in London over the last few years. It's down just by 6% in the last year alone. And drugs-related crime is down. So in that context, I would myself be pretty reluctant to change the law in order to make drugs more readily available. I think we've got the balance about right. And when I look at other cities, which I don't need to name to you, where they do have a culture...
You better not. You've got bad previous on that, man.
I'm not... Well, it's all right. I don't mind being sent to apologise to the people of Amsterdam or wherever it is. When I look at what goes on there, where they do have areas where they've had an experiment, I'm not convinced that the quality of life, the kind of stuff that's associated with that area is the kind of thing we want to see in London. So I'm pretty fixed on the way things are.
The woman there, and then I come to you up there, so yes.
Aren't we sending a conflicting message to people by having some drugs as illegal and other drugs such as alcohol or nicotine as being legal?
Ed Davey.
Well, I think that question actually shows we need to be evidence-led. We need to look at the evidence. I think there is some evidence that drug policy is working on the rehabilitation side. As Russell said, if we can treat people with humanity when they've got an addiction and try to help them get off that addiction, that can make a real difference to that person's life and the wider society. But I'm not convinced yet we've won the war on drugs by any means. There are still thousands of people dying from drugs. They scar communities. There are drug barons who are making billions from this. I think we do need to review the drug laws. I think we need to look at the evidence. Nick Clegg's asked our ministerial colleague Jeremy Brown to look at the experience in Portugal, in Amsterdam, in the United States, in parts of the states of the United States, in the Czech Republic and other places where they've changed some of the laws. And let's look at the evidence. If changing the law leads to a positive effect for society, then we should consider that.
Can you clarify what changing the law means in your mind?
Well,
abandoning the illegality of certain drugs. I mean, making cannabis legal, for instance. Is that what you're talking about?
There is a debate about whether we should decriminalise the use of cannabis. I've never yet been convinced by that, no. But what I am determined that we should do is review the laws from the evidence, because I think there's been a lack of policy based on evidence in this area, and that's what we should do.
But you've had evidence in Holland, haven't you?
Well,
Boris was referring to, the Russell Brand mentioned.
There's been some quite new changes, and it's actually rather more complicated than just following one particular country. There actually are a number of places around the world, in certain states in the US, in Portugal, in the Czech Republic, in Amsterdam, where they've made some changes. We need to learn from that. It might mean that as a result of that, we don't make any changes, but surely we should be based on evidence.
But you're encouraging people to think you would, aren't you, by the very fact you're saying it. It's not a closed book. Boris says he's against change, Melanie is against change. You're saying, let's look at how it works and maybe we will change.
I think something as important as this. We're already spending £500 million a year, rightly in my view, on rehabilitation. We're doing that. We're spending lots more, billions more, on dealing with the crimes. Now, and a lot of money is going to these wicked, organised criminals. Yeah. So I am wanting to make sure we're more effective. And if, as a result of the review of the laws, we got a better policy, surely that's the right way to go.
OK. The woman there in the black dress or dark dress, yes.
From what I understand, the budgets for the treatment centres have all gone down in the last few years. Exactly. So I don't think that it's much of a sign of commitment to the treatments that people have been referring to.
We're actually seeing more people under rehab.
Tessa Jowell.
Well, I was taken by the question about the inconsistency between alcohol and tobacco and drugs. And I remember when I was Public Health Minister many years ago now, and we were very concerned to reduce smoking and the harm caused by smoking, the fact that if you're poor, you're more likely to die from smoking-related diseases. And the Chief Medical Officer at the time observed that if tobacco was being introduced today, it would be classed as an illegal drug because there is no safe level at which you can smoke. But to take that, I thought that actually, I mean, I agree with the balance in Boris's answer, a combination of legislation which is properly enforced, but the point about treatment and help for people who either don't want to form a habit or who want to kick the habit is absolutely vital. And I think that for me, what affects me most about this is the fact my constituency of Dulwich and West Norwood is about 3 miles down the road, and I see week in, week out, the effect on young people of gang violence, gang intimidation by people who have made enormous amounts of money and destroy the lives of young people, and they are the drug barons. And I would be absolutely horrified if we did anything at all that made life easier or more profitable for them.
You say so, it's not working.
I agree with you. We've got to make sure these criminals are brought to book and aren't making billions of pounds out of vulnerable people. The question is, what is the best drugs policy? Now, I think we've made some improvements over the years, particularly on rehab, as I've said. But if there is evidence from abroad that we can learn from to test whether we make changes, surely you'd want to do that. I'm open-minded about this. It looks like I'm prepared to go with the evidence. And my question to others is, why won't you go with the evidence?
I've got to say, mate, it's good that you want to look at the evidence and everything, because as a person that knows a bit about addiction, being a drug addict and everything, is that it's from the dark ages, the way we're treating people with addiction. There's no one, we're like a couple of miles from Shoreditch, where the streets are alive, awash with people that are suffering from this disease. No one wants to be a homeless drug addict. No. The treatment's got to be available to them. People do want to get clean, and the more we stigmatise them, the more we alienate them, the less likely it is that they're going to get help.
another question. William Simmons, please. William Simmons.
With MPs set to vote on arming the Syrian rebels, would such an action only fuel further bloodshed?
MPs are set to vote on arming rebels in Syria. Will it only fuel further bloodshed? Tessa Jowell.
I think that I would vote against arming Syrian rebels, putting more arms into Syria. I think that the situation has changed over the last year. Those who are allied with the rebels are not just Syrian national insurgents, but Al-Qaeda, other jihadist groups. I think it defies belief that you can provide weapons only to the people that you want to receive those weapons. I think that what we should be doing is twofold. First of all, taking a lead on the rather paltry start that was made at the G8 earlier this week to reach a negotiated solution which has got to include the Russians. And I think now, with new leadership in Iran, may also be the time to bring Iran in to and around the negotiating table, and also to redouble our efforts to deal with the appalling humanitarian suffering of civilians in Syria itself, but then also the displaced people in the refugee camps on the borders of Syria. That's where our effort ought to be going, not on arming the rebels.
It seems that the Prime Minister and the Foreign Secretary at least considering arming the rebels. Boris Johnson, he talks about whether Parliament will have a say on it. What's your take on this?
I think the Prime Minister and William Hague are doing the right thing, the honourable thing, in trying to put pressure on Assad of Syria, who is running a completely nightmarish regime that is killing hundreds of tens of thousands of its own citizens. I think 83,000, 90,000 people have died. That's the objective. That's the diplomatic political objective in talking about arming the rebels. It's trying to get Putin to focus on what is happening, trying to put pressure on him, and trying to get Assad to draw back from carnage. I have to tell you that you agreed with me just now. I don't share anybody's optimism that you can get those arms to the right people. I think you're absolutely right in what you say, Tessa. Some of the people who are fighting on behalf in the rebel army are some of the most unpleasant jihadis that you could possibly think of. You'll have seen some of the stories about the atrocities that they've been committing. As far as I can make out, and I've dug into this as best I can, those stories are not false. There are some really terrible things being done in the name of the rebellion in Syria. And I do worry that any engagement by us in trying to arm them would simply intensify that conflict. And then we would be in the terrible position of trying to make sure ourselves, physically, that we were getting those arms to the right right people, to the so-called Democrats. And I'm not at all clear that we could ensure that. And even if we could arm those rebels to the point where they defeat Assad and install a new regime in Syria, it is far from clear to me what kind of a regime that would be. I'm afraid this is one of those appallingly difficult choices. I understand I understand totally what David Cameron is trying to do. I think he handled it very, very well at the G8 the other day. He's trying to put the maximum pressure on the Russians.
Isn't it dangerous to open up the possibility?
I would not vote for arming those rebels. I certainly wouldn't.
But clearly, you say you wouldn't vote for arming the rebels, not that you have a vote in the House of Commons. But isn't it dangerous to talk?
Well, I wouldn't support it.
All right, you wouldn't support it. But is it therefore, in your mind, not dangerous to talk up the possibility of giving arms? You say this is a way of bringing Assad to the table. But if you don't intend ever to use arms, is it right to say that you might use arms to help the
well, of course, the UK government is not alone in this, and this is something that's now supported by an option that's being canvassed by other EU countries and indeed the United States. So, when the United States speaks, they do. I think people around the world in the Middle East know they carry a big stick, and you've seen people will be aware of what's happened to regimes that the United States has threatened in the past. So, it is not a wholly, I suppose, meaningless threat, but in my own judgment, it would be absolutely impossible to carry it out.
A lot of people with their hands up. The man in the green shirt there, you said.
Why are we even considering arming external forces when we're sacking 5,000 of our top troops with 15 years' experience? We're recruiting new recruits for our army at minimum salaries and sending them ill-equipped into these war zones. Why are we sending billions elsewhere?
Okay, and you, sir, here. You were shaking your head at what he was saying. You disagree with him?
I'm a former army officer myself, and that was completely rubbish. Our troops going to battle fully equipped nowadays. It's completely rubbish that we're minus body armour, etc. I fully disagree with arming the Syrian rebels. I know full well that arms change hands in the blink of an eye in the Middle East. God knows they'll be used against us in a matter of months. So I think maybe leave the weapons out a bit and look at the humanitarian aid first and foremost.
Okay. The man in the fourth row there with the red tie. Yes, you, sir.
I think I definitely agree with Tessa and Boris that arming the Syrian rebels is wrong. I think it's against the UN policy, if I'm not wrong. And I also think it's a question of the Syrian government sovereignty in this case. And I think more should be done to work with China and Russia in order to broker a peace deal.
Syrian government sovereignty, meaning Assad should be allowed to sort out his own country. Is that what you mean by
yes.
that? Melanie Phillips, do you agree with that?
Well, I think I agree with what's been said, that arming the Syrian rebels would be a really, really bad move. But this is a really hideous situation. There are no good outcomes for us or for anyone from this. What you have is a war between, on the one hand, Assad and Iran and the Soviet Union versus rebels, Al-Qaeda, Islamists, and possibly America. Now, I don't think that the Prime Minister had a good G8 at all. I do take the view that what he did was foolish in the extreme, extremely stupid anti-diplomacy, made the British look ridiculous, and allowed President Putin, who doesn't seem to me to be someone I would like to have back to tea with my grandma, look as if he was running the whole show. And my reading, and I don't know whether this is true, but I read in the press that it was Mr. Cameron who tried to gee up a very reluctant President Obama to think about arming the Syrian rebels, and thus led Obama to the brink of doing that, and then said, oh my goodness, I can't get it through my own parliament. What a mess. The fact is that if the rebels, Al-Qaeda, the Islamists, win in Syria, nobody should be under any illusion that there will be human rights and democracy. It will be awful for the Syrians, and it will be awful for us. But no one should be under any illusion also that if Assad remains, it will be terrible for his people, who he has butchered in such large number, but also terrible for us, because Syria is a rogue state. It has been funding, arming, organising terror against Western interests for many years, and it is the pawn of Iran. And this is the bigger game here. I don't believe one can negotiate with Russia. I don't believe one can negotiate with Assad. I don't believe one can negotiate with Iran.
Can one do anything?
I believe that the key to this, if we're going to do anything, we should have our eye fixed on where our interests lie. And where our interests lie, as the West's interests lie, is in neutralising Iran. We have allowed Iran the time over many years, through this farce of talking to people who cannot be talked to continue with its pursuit of a nuclear bomb with which it intends, it says, to commit genocide against Israel, a state which is declared for the last 25 years war against us. That is the problem. That is the problem, the defeatism of the British people against a clear threat to this country's interests. You are the problem.
Melanie, I was with you. Melanie, I was with you all the way. I was with you all the way until you said we've got to neutralise Iran, and then I just.
You laugh. Neutralise Iran. The British audience laughs. How trivial of you. How incredibly ignorant of you. Do you not understand what a threat this country is to us? No, you don't.
All right.
Melanie, Paranoia. Paranoia.
Okay, hold on a second. Wait a minute. All right. Who said paranoia? Because maybe you want to comment on what, maybe enlarge on what you said, and then I come to Ed Davey. You don't want to speak? No.
Yes, I do.
You do. Go on then.
I agree with Melanie Phillips in that it is turning into a proxy war between America on one hand and Iran on the other. Excuse me. But I have to say as well, why does she always have to bring it back to Iran and we can't negotiate it with Iran and Israel?
Because it's the most dangerous.
It's very irrational.
How is it? Why is it irrational?
Why can we not deal with Iran?
Why is it irrational?
Where's your evidence that we cannot deal with Iran?
The evidence is, if you know
where's your evidence that Syria was
let her answer your
I'll
question.
tell you why it's not rational to think you can negotiate with Iran, because Iran is currently run by people who believe, as a matter of religious belief, that if they bring about the apocalypse, if they bring about literally the end of the world...
They have never said that. That's
would you let me perhaps speak,
false.
or is it entirely rational to stop somebody from speaking?
Sorry, go ahead.
They believe that if they bring about the apocalypse, they will bring to earth the Shia Messiah. That's the people you're dealing with.
The normal Iranian does not believe that.
All right,
I'm afraid you are simply
all right, the two of you can meet up afterwards. I'm going to... now, hold on, Boris. I want to bring Ed Davey in. Melanie Phillips said that the Prime Minister made a mess of the G8, in effect, by encouraging Obama to send forces into Syria.
Let me come to that, but I do just want to say your comments, Melanie, on Iran couldn't have been more poorly timed. There's just been an election in Iran. We have a new president of Iran, President Rouhani. If you read the Financial Times today, one of his advisors has written about wanting to make sure that we can reach out and telling the West, if we can reach out, there are ways that we can deal with the nuclear problem and the other tensions, and surely we should be doing that, and rather than some of the words we've just heard from
the new president
Melanie.
of Iran. The new president.
Melanie, let him go on and finish his point. You've had quite a good say.
But let me come back to the question, which of course was on Syria. There are a few things.
This current government broke promises to us. Who's to say Iran government is not going to break their promises?
Okay, carry on, Ed David. Don't put a microphone to people until I call them, if you don't mind, because we've got a lot of people wanting to get in. Sorry, go on.
On Syria, we are not arming the Syrian rebels. What we are doing is giving huge amounts of humanitarian assistance. We are providing non-lethal assistance to some of the rebels, but most importantly, all our efforts are on the diplomatic track. And far from the Prime Minister failing at the G8, quite the contrary. He managed to get an agreement with 7 actions with all the members of the G8 signing up to that. That was a real achievement. And actually, I think the relationship between Obama and Putin, between Kerry, Lavrov and Haig, is actually been improving. If you look at what they are doing, they are working together. We're going to have to try to work with the Russians to turn this round, because the Russians are the biggest sponsor of the Assad regime. And unless we get the diplomacy with the Russians right, nothing will happen. We'll still see the bloodshed. So diplomacy is the main thing, and working with the Russians is right, and you could not be more wrong.
Just before we leave that point, I'll come to you, Russell, in a moment. If you're not going to use weapons, why go to all the trouble of getting the EU to lift the ban on providing weapons?
But Boris was right on this. This is about raising the pressure.
Is that not a dangerous step to take if you don't actually intend to do it? I mean, you've said you don't. He doesn't think the government intends to do it. Tessa Jowell says nobody's going to do it. It's just a bluff.
No, we have to raise the pressure on the Assad regime, just like the Prime Minister was talking about at the G8, that Assad had to go, and the military regime under Assad, we would work with them at the negotiations at Geneva for a transitional government if they got rid of Assad. So all this is about putting pressure on the Syrian regime so we can get a peaceful solution without having to resort to violence. I think that is a very, very constructive approach by the Prime Minister.
Russell Brand.
What I think is that I lost my faith in what the government thinks after the Iraq War when they voted for that. That wasn't this government. I know you never voted for it, but some of the other people here voted for it. And for me, my trust has been diminished. I think that you're an army officer, aren't you, mate? So you know the score. I think that what we need to focus on is the humanitarian component. As you said, there's 4 million refugees inside the borders, 1 million outside the borders. This is World Refugee Day that no one seems to care about because the narrative of war is attractive to us. You don't have Xbox games about, hey, go give someone some aid on a border. You want to see destruction and war. Our militants, our leaders like to be heard being militant and bellicose, but it ain't no good for us. It's not helpful for us to exacerbate conflict in Syria because there may be chemical weapons, which I don't totally know the deal on that, but Patrick Coburn, he seems pretty up on the subject. He says it's highly dubious that they're even there, same as there weren't weapons of mass destruction. I say that we have to be extremely cautious and focus on the humanitarian issues, like our man said there.
Take another couple of points. Take a couple of points, let me go on. You there, yes, and then you at the very back there.
We thought the same about Iraq when we went, decided that, yeah, they have weapons of mass destruction, nuclear weapons, and now you seem to be pointing the same finger at Iran, especially, they just had a new president, so they should be given the,
all right,
they should be given the chance.
That point has been made here. And you up at the back there, on the left.
Hi, I've got 2 points.
1 point, if you would.
1 point, okay.
I'm actually
from a Shia Muslim background, and I find that statement extremely offensive. My family have served the British government even when we weren't British citizens, and I find that extremely offensive.
Okay. And all right, I'll take you at the very back there, and then the woman there. Yes, you at the very back.
I found it really concerning that this week the Prime Minister said that if the conditions were right, he could arm the rebels as a country without a vote. Just like Ed's assurance as a cabinet minister, albeit in a coalition government, that the Liberal Democrats won't let this happen.
There is no proposal to arm the rebels at the moment, OK? We have debated it in the National Security Council. We'll have to debate it there
what he was
again.
asking, to be...
Ed, I'm a Liberal Democrat myself. I'm pleading with you that, as a party, we won't let this happen.
Well, we know there are lots of arguments against arming the rebels. Just as Boris said, I've heard those concerns. We're debating those concerns. But the reason why it's not been taken off the table is because we want to ratchet up the pressure.
Yeah, but what about his question, which is, will you make sure that if there is a vote in the House of Commons, the vote is no?
If I answered that question, I would undermine our attempts to ratchet up the pressure. That's the whole point.
Will there be a vote? The question was, will there be a vote?
And there will be a vote.
There's got to be a vote.
Well,
absolutely. There's got to be a vote.
The Prime Minister has said if there was military action, there would be a vote.
Yeah.
And what would the vote be? Advisory, or would it be a vote, as the Speaker says it ought to be, which actually is decisive?
Well, if there was a vote in the House of Commons against the government policy, I think the government would have to take that as binding.
So is this an assurance that there will be a vote, at least?
Yeah.
Well, I think that's what you've got.
As I understand it, the Prime Minister said if there was military action, there would be a...
Well, you sit in Cabinet, you must know what's going on.
I do. I also sit on the National Security Council, where we debated this at length on a number of occasions.
Well, debated whether there should be a parliamentary...
We had a vote on Iraq, and as you rightly say, we got that wrong.
We've debated the issue of Syria at length. We haven't debated the question that my colleague has raised, but the Prime Minister has said, as I understand it, that if there was military action, there'd be a vote.
OK. Yes, I'll take 1 point from you, the woman there waving her arm there.
With the new Iranian president, Mr. Rouhani, who has promised more nuclear transparency, don't you think the international community should demand the same thing from Israel?
Well, Boris Johnson.
Well, it is a curious fact that, as far as I can make out, Iran is not actually in breach of the Non-Proliferation Treaty. And I don't think a lot of people realise this, nor is there actually yet, though, any convincing evidence that I'm aware of, that Iran is actually in the process of developing a nuclear weapon. I don't mean to say that they don't intend to or they don't want to, but as far as studying the evidence that we've got that's publicly available, I'm not aware of it. I think what is going on at the moment is unquestionably to do with a desire to use the nuclear issue and the ugly, reprehensible things that the Iranian regime has said as a means of driving regime change in Tehran. I think that's basically what the United States wants. Okay. I'm not convinced that they're going to achieve it, and I think the risk is, on the contrary, they'll just entrench that regime in power.
All right, I must go on because we've only got 10 minutes left, a bit under 10 minutes. Herman Munoz, please. Munoz, if that's the right pronunciation. Herman.
With UK average house prices rising to new highs and wages falling in real terms, should younger people get used to the idea of a lifetime of renting?
There are many, many younger people here in the audience. Are we going to have to get used to a lifetime of renting? Russell Brand, house owning, renting, prices up, you know the score.
Well, what I think is that if we continue to organise a society around protecting the privileges of people that are already rich, not prosecuting bankers, allowing people to cleverly avoid taxes, then, yeah, ordinary people are going to be penalised and aren't going to be able to fulfil the dream that Thatcher so beautifully presented us of owning our own council houses. So, unless there are significant changes over where we get our revenue from, and I might suggest people that have got loads and loads of money, people that are in the top tax bracket, yeah, like me, mate. I should pay a bit more tax. I'm happy to pay tax because, listen...
I'm sure the government would accept a voluntary contribution.
If I was going to give money to people, I tell you what, if I was going to voluntarily hand over my money, it would not be to the Tory government, man, because I don't trust them people. I don't trust any of them because they exist solely to protect the interests of the rich and powerful. They're not there for you. You know that in your hearts. So me, yeah, get used to a lifetime of renting unless you want to do something serious about it.
Boris Johnson.
It's absolutely true. I think owner-occupation in London is now beneath 50% for the first time certainly in our lifetimes. More and more people are driven to rent. The rents are skyrocketing. We've got a terrible shortage of housing overall. And the best answer is just to build more. We've got you will see in this fantastic volume, which I have no hesitation in plugging on this show, an ambition for a vision, a 2020 vision.
What is this? Can we see this? You're not allowed to show things like that.
This show,
you can't just do publicity.
I know,
it's written by you.
It's written by me. And it contains, you'll find in it, just some of the 33 opportunity areas and intensification areas that we have around London.
What about controlling rents in London so people didn't have rents that go up by...
You could.
Would you do that?
You could. I mean, I don't have this...
rental prices in London.
You could.
Become an extortionate.
It is.
Okay.
There is a serious...
You wait till the microphone comes to you, which it will now, and you can say it again, because you couldn't quite hear the shouting.
When are you going to introduce a cap on rising, crippling rental prices in London?
All right.
Okay.
Because it's now exceeding what an average mortgage would cost somebody.
It is. If I had the statutory power...
So they do in New York. They have it in New York. Why not here, Boris?
All right.
You failed to meet your targets.
Can you take the microphone away now, because we've got the point? Thank you. We can still hear you, but Boris, she says in New York. I think in New York it happens. I think in Germany it happens.
In Germany.
Why not in London? Why not in Britain?
Well, in New York, they're moving away from it, actually, now. They're moving away from rent controls because the difficulty is that you choke off supply. And what we've got to do is to increase the amount of housing available. The point I was going to make before you confiscated my
I'm sure you can remember what's in it,
is that we've got within it ambitions for those opportunity areas. Contrary to, I think, what you just said, we've built a record number of new affordable homes in London over the last 4 years. 54,000.
Who are they affordable for?
They're affordable for people. They're both, Russell. They're both for social people who need homes for social rent. But they're also there. And you say I think you slightly sort of poured scorn on the idea of the home owning democracy and all that stuff and the ownership of council houses. Actually, I think there are many hundreds of thousands of people in this city who would welcome the opportunity to get just a share of the equity.
Yeah, but what's the answer about affordable that Russell put? How many of them are affordable? What price are they at?
The answer is to build more homes.
Hey, but what are the ones you've been boasting about? What price are they at? Well, who can afford them? That was what Russell Brand was asking.
They are at normal. They are at about 17 or 18% of the newest ones are at council at normal. Social
getting a bit lost here, I think.
And we have a huge number that are part buy, part rent. And if you look at what we've done over the last 4 years, it is a record number. And far from, and the programme that we've got will deliver 100,000 over the 8-year term. Now, that is far more than the previous Labour government achieved when they were awash with money. Well, I'm not denying that there is a massive shortage of housing.
I'm going to have to ask you to stop because we've only got 3 minutes left. You've had your minute. It's like just a minute. You've had your minute without repetition. I'd like to go to the woman in red there. I'm sorry, I have to stop because we've got to bring in other people.
Well, you're supporting a lovely development in the outskirts of Coulsdon, and their first phase under pre-application is not for the affordable housing, but it's for the ones at the top of the hill. And can I say those ones? There's 78 5-beds proposed, 200 and something 4-beds, and 200 and something 3-beds. The little 1-beds and the little 2-beds, and I am trying to talk to Croydon Council about it, and you're not having it.
But Melanie Phillips.
Well, I think there is definitely a need for more affordable housing. I think young people do have a very difficult time of it at the moment in terms of either getting on the housing ladder to buy a house or affording rents. And I don't think one can avoid it, saying it, that, you know, people of my generation, I mean, we saw, you know, our house prices in London become, you know, just sort of dizzyingly go into the stratosphere. Now, why that happened was quite a complicated procedure, I think, but part of the reason was I think we were the victim of this of London's own success, because, you know, London had over this period attracted a very large number of extremely wealthy people who were, you know, pushing up house prices.
Have young people got to get used to the idea of renting now as a lifetime's way of living?
I don't know.
Or living with their parents until they're 40?
At the moment, that is unfortunately the case. Whether that will endure is another matter.
We've got to press on, because I'll take a point from you, sir. We've got to press on because we've only got a couple of minutes left. Yes.
I think young people have got to get used to us renting, because when we come out of university, we're already in debt, so we have to pay off that debt before we can do anything else. So
do you resent that? Do you resent?
Yeah, because the Lib Dems promised they're not going to put up the debt, and then it goes up to 9,000. So now when you come out of uni, you've got to worry about debt, so you're starting in a minus already.
Okay.
So how can...
Ed Davey? Well, you will, when you leave university, you're paying less back a week, less back a month than you were previously under the old regime. We've had to take some tough decisions, but actually it's going to be easier in terms of the less money coming from your pocket when you've graduated. But to answer the question, there's no doubt about it that housing is one of the biggest, if not the biggest, social problem in London. I have 2 advice surgeries a week in my constituency where people come and see me, and the biggest problem has always been, since I became an MP in 1997, has been housing, overcrowding, poor housing, people who are homeless. I see that every week in my surgery, so this is a problem. The person asked the question is absolutely right. What can we do about it? Well, the government has been trying a huge number of initiatives to try to get the housing market working again. One of the reasons why some developers weren't building houses was because they saw house prices going down and down and down, and they didn't want to build an asset which would reduce in value. So getting the housing market working is absolutely critical, and I believe we are achieving that. I hope we will see more house building promoted by this government. You'll see, I hope, next week when the spending review is announced, that housing is a priority. We've also got to...
You must stop adding also, because I've got to stop the programme. I mean,
well, just come back. We're seeing huge investment in London.
So hang on, Tessa Jowell, you've got to have a say. Yes, you behave. 30 seconds.
The most important thing, build more homes. The Mayor's got to up his game on this.
Oh, come on, Tessa, I did better than Ken. I've done far better than Ken.
The homes that have been built were commissioned under Ken Livingstone, but also let's take all the profiteering out of the process of renting, and let's get shared equity schemes, and there are 3,000 homes about to be let in the Olympic Park.
All right. Thank you for keeping it short, Tessa. And apologies those who've got your hands up. Shush, shush.
50%.
Shush, you can't go on. That's the Stop television programme, not a mayoral press conference.
Get where I am.
Yeah, I know you do. I know you used to. Our hour is up, sadly. I'm sorry we couldn't get to the last question from Oliver Thomas, which was who has more power, politicians or pop stars, which might have been very relevant tonight. But anyway, our time's up. Next week, we're in Newcastle. The week after that, we're going to be in Basildon. So if you want to take part in either programme, go to our website, the address is on the screen there, or call 0330 123 9988. If you're listening to this on 5 Live, you can call in and continue the debate. Question Time, Extra Time with Steve Nolan and John Pienaar. My thanks to our panel here, to all of you who came to this magnificent setting for the programme. From Question Time in London, good night.
So, as David has just said, you can continue the debate tonight with Question Time Extra Time right now on Radio 5 Live. Bankers and the G8 dress down next tonight on BBC One in This Week.